And then the environmental impact of the disaster is likely to be very, very modest. I wonder if he wishes to stand on that statement today. When Mr. Hayward responded to the claims that cleanup workers were becoming ill because of oil fumes and such, he said this: food poisoning is clearly a big issue. And finally, most famously, Mr. Hayward informs us he wants his life back. Last year, Mr. Hayward enjoyed a splendid 41% pay raise, even as BP's profits dropped 45%. Now, I just happen to be a poor Polish lawyer from Detroit, but it seems to me that this is a curious response to a drop in profits. It makes me wonder what the compensation package of our witness will be to this year. Mr. Chairman, again, I thank you for your diligence and hard work on this issue. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and look forward to working with you on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, Ms. Blackburn, 3-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you and Ranking Member Burgess for holding the hearing today. Mr. Hayward, I thank you for your willingness to testify before this committee. You know, when news of the BP spill began and information about the well started to circulate, it seemed that there was problems not only with BP but also with MMS bureaucracy, and that maybe the problem lay there rather than with anything that that could have gone wrong with BP, that it was there with MMS. What we've learned and confirmed that that is not correct, that the problem does lie with BP in what went wrong. And while there are many faults with MMS in doing its job on inspection and safety oversight, most of the data now points to wrong decision-making by BP's management. And this is not the first time, and we've talked about that in several of our opening statements this morning. It's not the first time that you've been before this committee on safety problems, and certainly as recently as the Texas 2005 and Alaska 07 incidents, which revealed insufficient protocols in BP's management and safety hierarchy. There was this statement from BP that you all would, quote unquote, focus like a laser on safety. And it is concerning to us that the appearance is, Mr. Hayward, that BP has not learned from previous mistakes. So it leaves us asking the questions of you and of BP. Was this accident caused by negligence? Was it caused by risk-taking? Was it caused by cost-cutting measures by BP decision-makers? And unfortunately, for citizens, beaches, and wildlife all along the coastal region, they are paying a price for those misplaced decisions. BP cannot blame Mother Nature or equipment failure or even other subcontractors. Their actions have put at risk the livelihood of communities and businesses that depend on the Gulf, not only for seafood and tourism, but also energy production that this nation as a whole relies upon. In addition, the current administration also shares a significant portion of the blame for the oil spill. I mentioned MMS earlier, and the MMS officials approved inadequate spill response plans and field inspectors rubber-stamped inspection papers submitted by oil companies. This is another area where we as members of Congress, in doing our due diligence, will ask you all and MMS why. But what is the most damaging is that the President and senior officials knew on day one the blowout preventer was not working and knew of the potential spillage. While BP shoulders much of the responsibility for this spill, the lack of effort by this administration to contain the spill has doomed the economy and wildlife of the Gulf Coast from an oil spill which could have been contained. And now recently imposed drilling moratoriums will further devastate America's energy production and will destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs in the Gulf Coast region. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. I next turn to Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee, Mr. Braley, for an opening statement. 3 minutes, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, you're not going to get a lecture from me today, and you're not going to get an apology either. because we're here to get to the bottom of the decision-making process that BP followed, and I think, quite frankly, the people who live along the affected area of the Gulf Coast deserve those answers from you. We were in Chalmette, Louisiana last week, and we had the opportunity to hear from a variety of individuals whose lives have been devastated by this oil disaster. And I use the word disaster specifically because I don't think spill quite captures the magnitude of what's going on. The American people are frustrated because we were first told that this was a 1,000-barrel-per-day release, and then about a week later that was updated to 5,000 barrels per day, and then at the end of May it was adjusted upward to 15,000 to 19,000 barrels per day, and then this week we were informed that it could be as high as 60,000 barrels per day. That works out to 2.5 million gallons a day, 17.5 million gallons per week, and over the length of this disaster, it could be up to the level of the largest release of oil in the North American continent in history. Unintended. One of the things I think we need to know about today is the decisions that your company made and who made them that led to this explosion and the subsequent disaster, what your company is doing to fix this enormous problem, and about your future commitments to all of the affected workers, families, and communities who've been devastated by this disaster. And I think it would be helpful for you and everybody in this hearing room to hear from the two women who testified at our hearing in Louisiana last week, because they raised some very pointed questions that were directed to your company, sir. And they were questions that were raised after they gave passionate testimony of wanting the oil and gas business to continue in Louisiana and the Gulf Coast region. So I'd like to have you listen to their comments in the hearing. This is Natalie Rostow.
I would like to leave here today knowing that because of my husband's tragic death, we can begin to focus on making safety the most important priority. Not to focus on making more safety regulations, but on ways to effectively implement the ones that we already have. This tragedy will not be in vain, because as of right now, my husband's death is in vain. But it will not be in vain if it serves to make the lives of every man and woman working in the oil field the top priority, and cause these powerful oil companies to know that they will be held accountable for their actions. While I understand companies must make a profit, I do not believe it should be at the expense of risking lives or destroying families. I am asking you to please consider harsh punishments on companies who choose to ignore safety standards before other families are destroyed. My family can never and will never be adequately compensated for our loss.
These are now widows with small children to take care of, and they are the symbols and the faces of this disaster, and I look forward to your testimony. Yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Next turn to Mr. Gingrey from Georgia for a 3-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to again express my sorrow to the families of those who lost their lives on April the 20th, 2010. Through all the hearings and legislative consideration, we must remember those lives and the lives of their families, as we just saw, that were forever changed on that fateful April day, and we certainly must continue to keep them in our thoughts and in our prayers. Further, we have an obligation not only to those families, but also to everyone affected by the aftermath to get to the bottom of the causes of this accident and the failure to secure the situation and stop the devastation wreaked upon the Gulf Coast. Mr. Chairman, we have an opportunity in this oversight hearing to ask questions that get to the facts of what happened. However, today's hearing is incomplete. We can only ascertain half of the story today, because we do not have anyone representing the administration, the Mineral Management Service, to discuss their oversight role and their responsibility in ensuring that an accident like this didn't happen. Deep ocean drilling is not new. In fact, we have been doing it for decades in the Gulf Coast. Why did this happen now? I've heard some assert that it was a lax oversight of the previous administration that led to this accident. Well, if that's the case, why did this not happen during the last decade? Why did this occur almost a year and a half into the current administration? We need to hear from our own Department of Interior and the Mineral Management Services. Certainly, Mr. Hayward should be prepared to answer for BP's responsibility, but we will also need answers from the administration so that we can demand accountability and implement prudent reforms to return us to safe drilling in our oceans, because simply saying no to further and new drilling is not a realistic answer. I further realize there are some in this administration who have a penchant for not letting a crisis go to waste. But for a nation dependent on foreign oil, for a nation with unemployment hovering at 10%, we can't just say we can't do this. We can't take our ball and go home when the consequences mean a weaker America. Everyone dependent on foreign fuels and all too inclined, it seems, to let jobs leave this country. No, Mr. Chairman, we have to understand what happened on and leading up to April the 20th. We need to answer those questions to determine if the rules or the agency oversight were insufficient, or if this was purely an act of negligence or wanton disregard for sound regulations. Now, we can try to enact the perfect reform that ensures this never happens again, but it will not change the past or the toll upon the lives forever change. Mr. Hayward, the responsibility to make these families whole falls to you and your company, BP. You have an obligation to right this wrong, and not only the public trust, but also the belief in the free market and entrepreneurship demand it. Mr. Chairman, I await the opportunity to ask questions with the hope that we will soon discuss these same matters with our own administration. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gingrey. Ms. Gett for an opening statement, 3 minutes, please.
Mr. Chairman, as this is an investigative hearing, I will submit my excellent opening statement for the record in order to have more time for questioning the witness.
Very well. Mr. Doyle, opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for convening this hearing today so we can begin to understand what went so tragically wrong on the Deepwater Horizon. We're now 59 days into this environmental and economic tragedy, and oil continues to gush into the Gulf of Mexico. The estimates for how much oil spills into the Gulf each day continue to rise, and we still have no way to cap the well in the near future. We sit helplessly as we wait for a relief well to be completed. As the details and facts about Deepwater Horizon come to light, it is clear to us all that the decisions made by officials at BP that reflected bad judgment at best and criminal negligence at worst. Through this committee's investigation, we've learned that at nearly every turn, BP cut corners. In well design, the number of centralizers they used, whether to run a cement bond log, circulating drilling muds, and securing the wellhead with a lockdown sleeve, BP took the path of least resistance. On Tuesday, colleagues and competitors from the oil and gas industry provided sworn testimony that they believed BP had delinquencies in well design and failed to follow the best practices of the industry. Now we learned that BP had several warnings about the Macondo well, with one of their own engineers calling it a nightmare well. But instead of treating the well with caution, it seems that BP's only interest was in completing the well quickly and cheaply. Many questions still need to be answered. Were BP employees on the Deepwater Horizon given orders from BP officials to speed up the Macondo well? Were they told to slash costs wherever possible? Why would a team on board the rig to test the cementing of the well be sent home before performing the test? Surely if a cement bond log was ever necessary, it would be in a nightmare well situation. But sending the team home, BP saved $100,000 and 9 or 10 hours of work. Mr. Hayward, I hope you're here today to answer questions about the decision made on Deepwater Horizon that led to this tragic and deadly blowout. Earlier this week, this committee sent you a letter with detailed information about topics we would like you to address today. In reviewing your statements submitted for today's hearing, I'm extremely disappointed in your avoidance of the requested topics. I certainly hope that you use the opportunity today to answer our questions openly and truthfully. I know BP has committed to clean up the Gulf region, and I expect that commitment to be ongoing. I welcome your pledge to pay damages through a $20 billion escrow fund. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Rebuilding the public's trust in your company and your industry will take years and many serious changes in the way you do business. When you operate on our land and in our waters, you're only there because the public's trust has allowed you to be there. You violated that trust in the worst possible way. Mr. Hayward, I look forward to your testimony. I look forward to answers to our questions and your ongoing efforts to regain America's trust. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Mr. Griffith for opening statement, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for calling this important hearing today, and Mr. Hayward for taking time to come before our subcommittee to discuss what happened on the Deepwater Horizon. I know that, like us, your number one priority is stopping the flow of oil. Congress and this committee owe it to the American people to do whatever we can to aid the unified command in reaching this goal. This is a time for engineering and action, and I hope you will let us know what we can do in Congress to be helpful. There are still many questions to be answered about what happened on the Deepwater Horizon, and unfortunately we do know that the documents that we're reviewing, it does not look good. My hope for our hearing today is that we will be able to put political public relations shenanigans aside and focus on understanding why decisions were made and how BP and the industry can ensure that they learn from this incident so that drilling safely for our valuable resources can continue. And I might say this to you, you're never as good as they say you are or as bad as they say you are. So this hearing will go back and forth. The other thing I'd like to remind the committee is that the greatest environmental disaster in America has been cigarettes. 60,000 Americans today this year will die from cigarette-related cancers. So if we're going to talk about the environment, let's be sure we don't leave that out. I'm a cancer specialist, by the way, by training, and I never fail to bring that up. So the environment is an important concept. We regret the loss of life, but there's much that we can do, and we'll put this in perspective. This is not going to be the worst thing that's ever happened to America. Thank you.
Ms. Schakowsky, 3 minutes opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this very moment, oil is gushing from the Deepwater Horizon blowout at a rate between, we learned, 35,000 and 60,000 barrels a day, killing animals, destroying fragile wetlands, and wiping out entire populations of fish, and along with it, the jobs of hundreds of thousands of people. Most upsetting about this travesty is that it could have been avoided. As the ongoing investigation by this committee has already discovered, BP executives created an atmosphere where safety concerns were ignored in order to ensure that the company's already staggering profits this year, approximately $93 million a day in the first quarter, continued unabated. This appalling disregard for the Gulf Coast and its inhabitants is without question one of the most shameful acts by a corporation in American history. Sadly, the Deepwater Horizon spill is just the most significant example of BP's disregard for the environment and the well-being of its workers. A report published by the Center for Public Integrity found that between June 2007 and February 2010, BP received a total of 862 citations from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Of those, a staggering 760 were classified as being egregious and willful, compared with 8 at the 2 oil companies tied for second place. Inexcusably, this pattern of behavior continued in the spill's aftermath. I hold in my hand a document called Voluntary Waiver of Release that BP made unemployed fishermen sign before they could be hired for spill cleanup. The waiver states, I hereby agree on behalf of myself and my representatives to hold harmless and indemnify and to release, waive, and forever discharge the BP Exploration Production, Inc., from all claims and damages that I or my representatives may have with regard to my participation in the spill response activities. I know that you said this was an early misstep and that this was just a standard document, but this was the first response that you had to people that were hired. And outrage does not begin to express my feeling. These are people who are unemployed because of the recklessness of BP, forced to take jobs cleaning up BP's mess in order to survive. Yet to qualify for those jobs, they had to hold BP harmless for any further damages that they may suffer in BP's employ. This from a company that made $93 million a day. Fortunately, a court trumped your fancy lawyers who wrote this document, but still it begs the question, how could you do that? I'm glad that you're here, Mr. Hayward. I expect you to explain why your company has operated in such a wholly unacceptable manner. In the final analysis, the simple fact remains that if BP had thought more about the residents, as these widows said, and the workers, as these widows said, rather than the already exorbitant profits of its shareholders, we would not be here today. I yield back.
Mr. Latta for an opening statement, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Burgess, I want to thank you for holding the subcommittee hearing on the role of BP and the Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion and the ongoing oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. First and foremost, I also want to extend my heartfelt condolences to the families of those who have lost loved ones and to those who have been injured. The unprecedented scale of the spill and its increasing harmful impact on the Gulf economy and environment demand a thorough examination of BP's actions and inactions, as well as BP's current and future plans. The flow of oil must be stopped. Every day, anywhere from 35,000 to 60,000 barrels are spilling into the Gulf, and only 15,000 barrels a day are being captured. The environmental effects on the oil spill are harming shorelines and coastal wetlands, fisheries and fisheries habitat, as well as marine mammals and sea turtles. What is worse, we will not fully know the ecological ramifications of the oil spill until years down the road. Furthermore, local businesses are suffering great losses, including jobs and revenues that are dependent on tourism that are being threatened. The NOAA announced a revised commercial and recreation fishing closure in the oil-affected portions of the Gulf of Mexico, accounting to 33% of the Gulf of Mexico's exclusive economic zone. As oil continues to flow, this area is sure to enlarge, further exacerbating the economic damage. A recent economic impact study by the American Sport Fishing Association indicated that the entire Gulf were closed to recreational fishing from May through August. The region would lose $1.1 billion in revenue, which supports $2.5 billion in total sales, $1.3 billion in value added, $811.1 million in income, and 18,785 jobs. This potential economic damage is devastating to an area that has already suffered greatly from the aftermath of natural disasters. Americans continue to be frustrated with the lack of management and solutions from all parties involved, and I'm interested to hear more about the coordinated efforts between BP and the administration. The economic and environmental magnitude of this disaster necessitates a clear understanding of what went wrong, and BP needs to be held accountable for the disaster. I also look forward to having MMS and the Department of Interior before this subcommittee to also for them to answer some tough questioning. I look forward to the hearing Mr. Hayward's testimony, and I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Latta. Mr. Ross, 3 minutes opening statement, please, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Stupak, for holding today's hearing to examine BP's actions and decisions that directly led to the tragic explosion and oil spill that continues to gush and wreak havoc on the Gulf Coast at a rate up to over 1,700 gallons per minute. In fact, Mr. Hayward, since this hearing began a little over an hour ago, up to 112,847 gallons have been dumped into the Gulf. On day 59 of this environmental and economic disaster, with up to 60,000 barrels a day spilling into the Gulf, I continue to be frustrated and downright angry by BP's response and lack of a clear and productive plan to stop the leak or efficiently clean up the oil that is destroying the ecosystems that surround the Gulf. Reports have surfaced revealing that in the days and weeks before the explosion, BP knowingly made a number of decisions that increased the danger of an explosion and spill occurring. it seems apparent that BP put profit before safety. Many people are dead. Millions of gallons of oil continue to spew into the Gulf. I'm hopeful that Mr. Hayward can explain today why these decisions were made, how his company's actions led to this disaster, and what they are doing to remedy it. As oil floats into the marshes and onto the beaches, as shrimping vessels sit tied to docks, as restaurants and businesses during their peak season remain without tourists and customers, and as homeowners see their property values plummet, the people and wildlife of the Gulf Coast wait and wonder about how extensive the damage to the ecosystem or the economy will be. This spill is not only affecting the Gulf Coast. The jobs and economies of the surrounding states are hurting as well. My state of Arkansas borders Louisiana, and many of my constituents, people I know in my hometown, work on offshore rigs. These jobs are also at risk, and I hope BP will take responsibility for all those who are affected by this spill, regardless of where they live, and work to help pull them through this disaster as well. This spill is a wake-up call that must result in better government oversight, more advanced technology, stronger response plans, and improved safety standards, not only by BP and every oil company in America, but also by our government. Above all, this disaster is a learning experience that will help us prevent a tragedy like this from ever happening again. And I'm hopeful this hearing can provide the answers and solutions necessary to begin that process. Mr. Hayward, I truly hope that you'll give us open and honest answers today and not those prepared by your legal team. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. And next, I'd like to call on Ms. Christensen from Virgin Islands for an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. The explosion on the Deepwater platform and the subsequent outpouring of hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil into one of the most sensitive and important bodies of water in this country is indeed a tragic accident which caused 11 deaths, many injuries, and will have deep, long-lasting, debilitating, and expensive repercussions. The people of this country need to know what happened and who is responsible. All that has transpired since April 20th says to me that not only BP, but no company that is drilling anywhere in our outer continental shelf is prepared to deal with a spill at this depth. They're all there, applying their best efforts, using the best available technology, and still 59 days later, an end is not in sight. This is not acceptable. What has also become clear is that while BP reportedly used shortcuts they were warned not to, which may turn out to have caused the explosion, the deaths, injuries, and the devastating spill, they are not the only ones at fault. They could not have cut some of those corners without the complicity of employees at some of the responsible government agencies who did not do their job. We're all appalled that lives are lost by decisions made apparently in the interest of cutting costs, but also by the lack of adequate preparation for this worst-case scenario that we are facing today. The fact that the industry did not ensure that response technology kept pace with deeper drill wells lays blame at all of their feet. But we still cannot ignore the decisions made by BP, which, if they had been different, 11 people might still be alive today. We as a Congress, along with our President, who has had more than his share of crises that are not of his making, have some major challenges and critical decisions ahead. I hope that in the name of the 11 who died, the many more who were injured, the affected families, and now those who now depend on OCS platforms for their livelihood, that this and all of the hearings will help us to go beyond a knee-jerk reaction to do the right thing for the region and our country, that BP will be held, and any other responsible party will be held fully accountable and responsible, and that petroleum and natural gas companies learn important lessons that will ensure this does not happen again. I want to thank you, Mr. Hayward, for being here. I look forward to your testimony and full answers to the questions we will ask on behalf of the people in the region and on behalf of the American people. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, In the 59 days since the Deepwater Horizon explosion caused this extraordinary environmental catastrophe and economic catastrophe, we've heard time and again from BP that this was an aberration. The facts, regrettably, tell a very different story. In 2005, when BP's Texas City operation blew up, 15 workers lost their lives. In 2006, a BP oil pipeline in Texas ruptured and spilled 200,000 gallons of crude oil. In 2007, the year you became CEO, the BP Corporation settled a series of criminal charges, not civil charges, criminal charges, and paid $370 million in fines. And according to Risk Metrics, independent organization, BP has one of the worst health, environment, and safety records of any company in the world. And in only 1 year, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, found more than 700 violations at BP's Texas City refinery, and BP paid a record $87 million in a fine. An independent review panel charged BP with putting profits before safety. And earlier this year, a BP refinery in Toledo was fined $3 million for willful safety violations, including the use of valves similar to those that contributed to the Texas City blast. And finally, of course, we have the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe. And the more evidence that comes in, the more it's clear that that event was foreseeable and it was avoidable. After the explosion, BP said there was no oil leaking. Then it said there was 1,000 barrels a day leaking. Then it went to 5,000 barrels. We're now up to 60,000 barrels. For 59 days, Mr. Hayward, BP has told the American people that this was an aberration, that it was a singular occurrence and that it wouldn't happen again. Mr. Hayward, it's not an aberration. For BP, regrettably, this is business as usual. It's deja vu again and again and again and again. And the question I think many of us have is whether a CEO who has presided over a company that has incurred $370 million in criminal fines, whose company, according to independent assessors, has one of the worst records in the world for safety and consistently puts money ahead of safety, whose peers, including Mr. Tillotson from ExxonMobil, who testified where you are 2 days ago, said that Exxon never would have drilled a well the way BP did at Deepwater Horizon, and who as CEO has presided over the destruction of nearly $100 billion in shareholder value and the suspension of an annual $10 billion dividend. Does that leader continue to enjoy and have a valid claim on the trust and confidence of his employees, his shareholders, the public, regulators, and most importantly, the families and small businesses of the Gulf Coast? Or is it time, frankly, for that CEO to consider to submit his resignation? I thank you and yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Green for an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Haywood, I appreciate your testimony, your being here this morning. And most people on this committee know I'm a big supporter of outer continental shelf drilling and domestic energy production. And I understand from your testimony and our other hearings we've held and meetings with the administration that efforts to cap the well are going as expeditiously as possible. However, like many of my colleagues here, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that there's been almost 2 months and we still have thousands of barrels of crude oil gushing in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm frustrated by the threat, this disaster's impact on our wildlife and coastline. I'm particularly frustrated this single incident, one well out of 1,000 successful wells of this type have been drilled, is threatening my constituents' livelihoods and the livelihoods of most of the communities on the Gulf Coast, literally from Alabama all the way back to Brownsville, Texas. This disaster has called the oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico to shut down. Even if the moratorium does not last 6 months, it will be too late for many of these folks. But these people are not the ones to blame. They're the hardworking people who, with a work ethic like none other, that take their responsibility on these regs seriously. However, according to the investigation of this subcommittee has conducted, it's obvious that several BP officials on and off the Deepwater Horizon rig did not take their responsibility of this rig seriously. Halliburton, Schlumberger, and many others warned BP officials that the decision they were making were bad ones that could lead to serious trouble. And now people are losing their jobs because of the moratorium on drilling. They could have been prevented if BP had not chosen expediency over safety, which brings to my next point. Whether it was the Alaskan pipeline disaster or the Texas City refinery fire where 15 people died, time after time it's been shown that BP chooses expediency over safety. Yet, Mr. Hayward, in your testimony, you write that none of us knows why it happened. However, this subcommittee has uncovered 5 areas where BP made decisions that increased the risk of a blowout to save the company time and expense. I added up the hours that these extra precautionary actions would have taken, and it comes to about 3 to 4 days. That's assuming that many of these actions would not have occurred simultaneously, which way they know they could have. For an extra 3 days of work, men's lives would have been saved, and an industry record of safe and responsible production in the Outer Continental Shelf would still be in place, which brings me to my last point. In your testimony, Mr. Haywood, you say that this incident calls into question whether the oil and gas industry can explore for oil and gas in safer and more reliable ways, and what the appropriate regulatory framework for the industry should be. Mr. Hayward, the decisions made by a handful of BP individuals called this into question, not this accident, and you should take the responsibility for the workers who did nothing wrong and are now losing their jobs. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Ms. Sutton for an opening statement, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman Stupak. It's been nearly 2 months since the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig resulted in the deaths of 11 workers and injured additional workers. Since that time, we have witnessed the worst environmental disaster in our nation's history, a disaster that continues to pour an estimated 60,000 barrels of oil a day into the Gulf of Mexico, a disaster that has led to over 66,000 victims filing claims to receive compensation. Through this subcommittee's work, several alarming decisions by BP have come to light, decisions that were made to save money and time. It's unconscionable when companies pay more attention to their costs and their profits than to their own workers' safety and to our environment. At our last hearing, one witness from Transocean testified that a duplicate blowout preventer system cost roughly $15 million, a system not used on the Deepwater Horizon rig. BP also utilized a more risky option for steel tubing, saving at least $7 million. BP also did not fully circulate drilling mud or secure casing hangers between pipes of different diameters. And critical signals were brushed aside. When standard methods were not followed to center the steel pipe in the drill hole, one of BP's operations drilling engineers remarked in an email, quote, "Who cares? It's done. End of story." But these cut corners have been anything but the end of the story. As the workers and volunteers from around the country help clean up the oil from the disaster, many are becoming ill. Between April 22nd and June 10th, 485 of BP's own workers have been injured. Louisiana Department of Health is reporting 109 illnesses in cleanup workers. And the money and time BP tried to save has long been lost, as they have already paid $81 million in claims. Mr. Hayward, like many Americans, I feel physically sick when I see the clips of the oil gushing in the Gulf, witnessing the devastation of our waters and our coast and the wildlife, thinking about the lives of the workers killed, and hearing and seeing the pain in the faces and the hearts of the people, the families, the small businesses, the fishermen, and others in the Gulf, all consequences of this catastrophe. This culture of carelessness and taking shortcuts to maximize profits at the expense of safety, this come what may, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, attitude is unacceptable, it's outrageous. BP must be accountable for the consequences of that approach, and we must take actions necessary on behalf of the American people to make sure that such a reckless approach will be forever abandoned. The risks and costs to our environment and to the workers in the Gulf Coast, to the workers throughout our economy, are simply too great to allow otherwise. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Sutton. That concludes the opening statements of all members of our subcommittee. As I noted in the opening, we have members of the full committee here. I'd like to recognize them. They will be allowed to ask questions by order of seniority. Mr. Ensley is here, member of the committee. Ms. Castor is here. Mr. Gonzalez, Ms. Capps, Ms. Harmon, Mr. Weiner, Mr. Malongsong and Mr. Scalise. I'd like to comment to Mr. Malongsong and Mr. Scalise are members of our committee. They also hosted us when we had the field hearing in New Orleans a few weeks ago, last week, and we had 9 members go down. It's one of the largest fields hearings we've ever had, so you can see the interest in here. I should also note that Ms. Jackson Lee is with us, not a member of the committee. She will not be allowed to ask questions, but we welcome her, and I know she sat in on previous hearings we've had. So, let's move on with our first witness. Our first witness is Mr. Tony Hayward, who is the Chief Executive Officer of BP PLC. Mr. Hayward, it's the policy of this subcommittee to take all testimony under oath. Please be advised that you have a right under the rules of the House to be advised by counsel during your testimony. Do you wish to be represented by legal counsel? I'm sorry, you're going to have to just press that button right there, sir.
I do not.
Do not. Okay, we also asked, the committee asked if you would have a technical person with you so you could consult if we ask some questions that you want to run it by your technical person. Do you have a technical person with you?
I do.
Could you state his name and position for the record, please?
Mike Zangi, drilling engineer.
Okay. During your testimony, any time if asked a question you want to consult with that individual, please let us know. We'll give you a moment to do so before you answer, but you'd be the only one who could answer the question. Is that clear? Thank you. Then, Mr. Hayward, I'm going to ask you to please rise, raise your right hand, take the oath. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, the matter pending before this committee?
I do.
Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. Mr. Hayward, you are now under oath. We'd like to hear an opening statement from you. You may submit a longer statement, if you will, for the record, but if you would, please begin your opening statement. And let me again, on behalf of all members of the committee, we appreciate your willingness to appear here today.
Okay. Chairman Waxman, Chairman Stupak, Ranking Members Barton.
Suspend, please, sir. Ma'am. Before we begin again with Mr. Hayward, let me just again mention those viewers in our audience. Emotions run high on this issue, but we have a hearing to conduct here. We're going to conduct our hearing. It's going to be done with proper decorum. Mr. Hayward, when you're ready, we're going to start the clock over. You may begin.
Chairman Waxman, Chairman Stupak, Ranking Member Barton, Ranking Member Burgess, members of the committee. I'm Tony Hayward, Chief Executive of BP. The explosion and fire aboard the Deepwater Horizon and the resulting oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico.
Excuse me, Mr. Hayward. I'm going to ask you just to pull that up. Some of the members are having trouble hearing, probably over the clicking of the cameras, but we're having a little trouble hearing you. If you could just pull it a little closer. Thanks.
The explosion and fire aboard the Deepwater Horizon and the resulting oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico never should have happened, and I'm deeply sorry that it did. When I learnt that 11 men had lost their lives I was personally devastated. 3 weeks ago, I attended a memorial service for those men, and it was a shattering moment. I want to offer my sincere condolences to their friends and families. I can only begin to imagine their sorrow. I understand how serious this situation is. It is a tragedy. I want to speak directly to the people who live and work in the Gulf region. I know that this incident has had a profound impact on your lives and caused great turmoil, and I deeply regret that. I also deeply regret the impact the spill has had on the environment, the wildlife, and the ecosystem of the Gulf. I want to acknowledge the questions that you and the public are rightly asking. How could this happen? How damaging is the spill to the environment? Why is it taking so long to stop the flow of oil and gas into the Gulf? We don't yet have all the answers to these important questions, but I hear and understand the concerns, frustrations, and anger being voiced across the country. And I know that these sentiments will continue until the leakage stops and until we prove through our actions that we are doing the right thing. Yesterday, we met with the President of the United States and his senior advisors. We discussed how BP could be more constructive in the government's desire to bring more comfort and assurance to the people of the Gulf Coast beyond the activity we've already done. We agreed in that meeting to create a $20 billion claims fund to compensate the affected parties and pay for the costs to federal, state and local governments of the clean-up and environmental mitigation. We said all along that we would pay these costs, and now the American people can be confident that our word is good. I've been to the Gulf Coast. I've met with fishermen, business owners and families. I understand what they're going through, and I promise them, as I'm promising you, that we will make this right. After yesterday's announcement, I hope that they feel we're on the right track. I'm here today because I have a responsibility to the American people to do my best to explain what BP has done, is doing, and will do in the future to respond to this terrible accident. First, we're doing everything we can to secure the well, and in the meantime, contain the flow of oil. We're currently drilling 2 relief wells. We believe they represent the ultimate solution. We expect this to be complete in August. Simultaneously, we've been working on parallel strategies to minimize or stop the flow of oil. While not all of them have been met with success, it appears that our latest containment effort is now containing about 20,000 barrels a day. By the end of June, we expect to have equipment in place to handle between 40 and 50,000 barrels a day, and by mid-July between 60 and 80,000 barrels a day. Second, I've been clear that we will pay all necessary clean-up costs. We've mounted what the Coast Guard has recognized as the largest spill response in history. We've been working hard under the leadership of the Unified Command to stop the oil from coming ashore. And whilst we're grateful these efforts are reducing the impact of the spill, any oil on the shore is deeply distressing. We will be vigilant in our clean-up. Third, as I have made clear from the beginning, we will pay all legitimate claims for losses and damages caused by the spill. Those are not just words. We've already paid out more than $95 million, and we've announced an independent claims facility headed by Ken Feinberg to ensure the process is as fair, transparent, and rapid as possible. Fourth, we need to know what went wrong so that we as a company and we as an industry can do better. That is why, less than 24 hours after the accident, I commissioned a non-privileged investigation. I did it because I want to know what happened, and I want to share the results. Right now, it's simply too early to say what caused the incident. There is still extensive work to do. A full answer must await the outcome of multiple investigations, including the Marine Board. To sum up, I understand the seriousness of the situation and the concerns, frustrations and fears that have been and will continue to be voiced. I know that only actions and results, not mere words, ultimately can give you the confidence you seek. I give my pledge as the leader of BP that we will not rest until we make this right. We're a strong company and no resources will be spared. We and the entire industry will learn from this terrible event and emerge stronger, smarter and safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayward. One of the bad parts about conducting a hearing, we get interrupted every now and then by votes. And we have 3 votes pending right now. There's, I think, about 10 minutes remaining on this vote. I would suggest, instead of trying to get into questions, we take a break right now. Let's stand in recess for 30 minutes. Let's come back at noon and continue this hearing. We'll start with questions from all the members. Okay? This committee will be in recess until 12 noon.
move the speaker. Oh, here. You know where the second one is?
I know where it plugs in.
Oh, he put it all the way back there.
Committee will come back to order. When we left off, Mr. Hayward had finished his opening statement. We'll begin with questionings. I'll begin. Mr. Hayward, when I heard about the explosion in the Gulf, the immediate company that popped in my brain was BP. And that's because last number of years from Texas City, where people died and 170 people were injured, the North Slope, the problems we've had there, and BP's own 2007 report on the Management Accountability Project, in which it stated there was a culture that evolved over the years that seemed to ignore risk, tolerate non-compliance, and accepted incompetence. So I wasn't surprised when we heard about the explosion in the Gulf and BP was part of it. Since then, this committee, the Oversight and Investigations Committee of the Energy and Commerce Committee, we have methodically looked at this issue. And I know you have and your company has also. On May 12th, we had a hearing, which we looked at a number of things that went wrong. On May 25th, our committee, Chairman Waxman and myself, put out a memo, and it was based on BP's preliminary report. And I'm sure you're familiar with that report, are you not, sir?
I am.
And then on June 14th, Chairman Waxman and I sent you a letter, 14 pages, where we talk about the crazy well and the nightmare well. Quite frankly, BP blew it. You cut corners to save money and time. And as the chief executive officer of BP, as I stated in my opening, you called for a leaner decision-making process. You called for fewer people in the decision-making process. You stated individuals need to be accountable for risk and to manage risk. Therefore, the BP's leadership managed the risk in this well. Did you manage the risk properly?
Since I've been the CEO of this company, I have focused on safe, reliable operations. I've set the tone from the top by making it very clear to everyone in BP that safe, reliable operations are our number one priority. Well, of course, it's about much more than words. Safety is about three things. It's about plant, it's about people, and it's about process. In the last 3 years, we've invested more than $14 billion in plant integrity.
But then what happened here? I mean, the June 14th letter we put out the other day, we went through 5 major areas. The head of the CEOs of the oil companies that were before this committee Tuesday all said, you did it wrong. They never would have done a well this way. You made decisions whether to do a casing or the string with the tie back, which everyone said the tie back would have been safer. The lockdown sleeve. Centralizers, instead of doing 21, as was recommended, you only do 6. That defies this safety emphasis, does it not?
We've launched an investigation, which we've shared with yourself, Mr. Chairman, and all of your members, which has identified 7 areas. It's identified areas around cement, casing, integrity pressure measurement, well control procedures, and 3 areas around the blowout preventer which failed to operate.
Sure.
That investigation is ongoing. It's not complete.
You're the CEO of this company. You said you were here to answer the questions of the American people. You were an exploration manager with BP. You were the director of BP's exploration. You were vice president of BP's exploration and production. You hold a PhD from the University of Edinburgh. Based on our May 12th hearing, the May 25th memo, our June 14th letter to you, based on all those facts, are you trying to tell me you have not reached a conclusion that BP really cut corners here?
I think it's too early to reach conclusions with respect, Mr. Chairman. The investigations are ongoing. They've identified 7 key areas. And when they're complete...
Every one of those 7 key areas, sir, dealt with saving time and saving money and accepting the risk. So if we use your own words, if you're going to hold BP accountable, then we have to manage the risk. Shouldn't leadership at BP be held accountable here?
There is no doubt that I've focused on safe, reliable operations. We've made major changes in everything we do over the last 3 years. We've changed people.
What changes have you made since April 20th, when the BP Deepwater Horizon exploded? What changes were made then?
Based on what we know so far, we have made changes with respect to the testing and evaluation of blowout preventers. We've made changes with respect to ensuring that people who are likely to be dealing with well control are up to date and fully validated for well control procedures. And as we learn more about what happened here, we will continue to make changes.
My time's just about up, and I'm going to try to hold members quickly to our time because we want to get through at least one more round. Let me just ask you this. Last 5 years that I've been up here, your safety record, you have 26 people dead, more than 170 injured. You have the largest spill ever in Alaska. You now have the largest environmental disaster that hit the United States with no end in sight with this disaster. Do you believe the U.S. government should continue to allow companies that have poor safety records, poor environmental records, to explore minerals or oil exploration in our country? Should there be a ban on companies that have miserable safety and environmental records?
In the 3 years that I've been CEO, I've focused on improving dramatically our safety and environmental performance. Prior to this accident, that had indeed been the case, and that is why, amongst all the other reasons, I am so devastated by this accident.
I agree. And under your tenure, you said you had the 2007 report that was scathing of BP's culture. We still have problems with Alaska. You said you're going to hold people accountable. Who are we going to hold accountable here?
We've engaged in a systematic change at BP over the last 3 years. We have begun to change the culture. I'm not denying that there isn't more to do, but we have made dramatic changes in the people we have in our organisation, the skills and capabilities they have. We've invested heavily into that. We've changed significantly the processes that we use to manage our operations, and most importantly, perhaps, we've made safe, reliable operations the core of the company. It is the thing that I talk about every time I talk internally and every time I talk externally about BP.
Not to play game semantics, but in your opening statement you said as long as you were CEO of BP, these things would occur. Do you expect to be CEO of BP much longer?
At the moment, I'm focused on the response. I think everyone here believes that the highest priority is to stop the leak, contain the oil on the surface, and clean it up. And that is what my focus is.
Mr. Burgess for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Highest priority, stopping the leak. Let me just ask Mr. Hayward, is your presence here today in any way interfering with that number one task of stopping the leak?
It is not.
Thank you. Let me ask you, or let me just make a statement for clarification. I am not going to apologize to you. It was, after all, BP executives who were on that rig, BP executives who ultimately could have made the call to stop operations when things became unsafe, and ultimately you are the person at the top and you are responsible. We lost 11 men on that rig, or Transocean and other companies lost 11 men on that rig. I don't feel that apologies are in order, but Mr. Chairman, I do have serious questions about the setup of this fund that we heard about from the White House yesterday, and I hope this committee will stay engaged in the oversight of that activity as well. It's still disturbing to me that we have not had anyone from the federal regulatory side. We've brought a ton of other people in here and questioned them, but really we need Mr. Salazar here. We need whoever the minerals and management people were who approved that exploration plan that BP submitted that was woefully inadequate. Shame on you, Mr. Hayward, for submitting it, but shame on us for accepting it with just simply a rubber stamp. Now I've got some questions that I do need to ask. BP, unfortunately, is not the first time you've been in front of our committee. And in 2006, although you were not CEO in September of that year, I pulled the transcript last night and looked through it again. It was a big oil spill in Alaska, had to do with not proper maintenance on the pipelines. And when you came in, you said you were going to focus like a laser beam on safety. And certainly that had to be welcome news after Texas City, after the North Slope accident. So what safety briefings do you get as your office of Chief Executive Officer, and who provides them to you?
The basis of our management of safety performance is through something that we call our Group Operating Risk Committee. It's a committee that I set up, I chair. It involves the heads of all of the business streams. And we meet on a bi-monthly basis to review the safety performance across the company. That process is mirrored down through the company.
And what type of safety directives then, or what type of directives do you issue in terms of safety as a result of those meetings? And perhaps would you be willing to share some of that information with the committee as we go forward?
We can certainly share that information with the committee. That they range from changes to procedures to requirements to have people where there are issues with safety to come and present to us.
But somebody records minutes during those meetings, and then your directives that come as a consequence of those briefings are written down and delivered to the appropriate managers on the ground?
There are minutes of those meetings.
I beg your pardon?
There are minutes of those meetings.
Let me ask you this. And Mr. Stupak already alluded to the fact that should we allow someone who's perhaps not following the best practices, drilling practices, to continue to drill, is there any other well, to your knowledge, in the Gulf of Mexico that has been done in the same manner as this well that was being drilled under the Deepwater Horizon?
There are many wells in the Gulf of Mexico.
Are there any other wells where you haven't put the proper number of centralizers
there are
in?
many wells in the Gulf of Mexico that have the same casing design. There are many wells that have been drilled where the same cement procedure has been
Now, have the Minerals and Management Service people been there and looked over those with a fine-tooth comb?
Everything that we do is subject to regulatory oversight.
Are you changing your procedures at those wells as a result of things that you've encountered in your investigation with the Deepwater?
As we learn from our investigation, we will make appropriate changes, as I've already indicated.
Are there any of those changes that are ongoing right now?
The ones that I've talked about are ongoing.
Well, let me ask you this. The question came up about centralizers, and someone said that they'd rather push some more cement or squeeze more cement than get something stuck. I'm not technically savvy enough to know exactly about that, but if that's the statement and you're going to push cement and deal with a fewer number of centralizers to hold this thing steady in the center of the column, is there any way to find out that, in fact, that cement went where you intended it to do, and that rod didn't, in fact, get off to one side or the other?
I wasn't part of the decision-making process on this well. I've looked at the material.
Yeah, that's not the question I asked you. Was there a procedure that could have been followed that would have actually given that information?
I can't answer that question.
Well, there is.
I'm not a cement engineer, I'm afraid.
There is, and those people were available, and for whatever reason they decided not to do that. Do you think that might have made a difference in the ultimate story of the Deepwater Horizon?
I'm not prepared to speculate on what may or may not have made a difference until such time as the multiple investigations that are ongoing are concluded.
Well, but prior to April 20th, when the well blew up, were you briefed on the progress of the drilling of the Mankato well?
The only knowledge I had of the Macondo well occurred in April, when it was evident to the team drilling it that we had made a discovery, and they notified myself that we made a discovery. That was my only prior involvement in the well.
Who briefed you? Who briefed you on that discovery?
The person who would have briefed me would have been the chief executive of exploration and production.
And were you privy then to any other information, the difficulties that they'd had, the multiple gas kicks, the losing the tools down the hole, the length of time they'd been over the hole, the decisions to move quickly because we'd spent too much time over this well?
I had no prior knowledge.
Who would have had that information?
Certainly the drilling team in the Gulf of Mexico.
But you're the CEO of the company.
And with
do you have any sort of technical expert who helps you with these things who might have been there?
With respect, sir, we drill hundreds of wells a year all around the world.
Yeah, I know. That's what's scaring me right now. Did you have a technical expert who was advising you there on this well? Because we've heard from other people that there were problems. It was a bad well. It was a dangerous well. Gas kicks, and the mud was not degasified or whatever the procedure was. So did you have a technical expert advising you?
I had no prior knowledge or involvement in the drilling of this well. None whatsoever.
Well, then who was? If you're the CEO of the company, if I'm a shareholder of BP, which I'm not, but if I am, how can I then have comfort that the CEO knows what's going on as far as safety on the rigs? Or is it true that it's just all about profit?
There was a drilling team providing oversight of this well.
There was a drilling team.
I'm going to have to go to Mr. Waxman.
All right.
Mr. Waxman, for questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, when you became CEO 3 years ago, you said that safety was going to be your top priority. You would focus on it like a laser. Your website said safe and reliable operations are integral to BP's success. I want to ask you whether you think BP has met that commitment that you made when you became CEO.
Since I became CEO, we have made a lot of progress. We have made it very clear to everyone in the company that safe, reliable
Have you met
operations,
that commitment that you made?
and we've made major changes. We've made major changes to our
You made major changes,
We've
but
made
now we
major
see
changes
this
to the
disaster in the Gulf. Does that indicate that you didn't keep that commitment?
And one of the reasons that I am so distraught
Could you
by
answer
this
yes or
action
no?
is that
I don't want to know whether you're distraught. I want to know whether you think you've kept your commitment.
we have focused like a laser on safe and reliable operations. That is a fact.
Okay, well, let me ask
every
you.
day.
Let me follow up on that. We had a hearing earlier this week with CEOs from the other oil companies. They were unanimous in their view that you made risky decisions that their companies would not have made. And in particular, they criticized your decision to install a long single string of casing from the top of the well to the bottom on April 19th, the day before the blowout. They said this well design choice provided an unrestricted pathway for gas to travel up the well in the annular space that surrounded the casing. And of course, it blew out the seal. How do you respond to their criticism? Did BP make a fundamental misjudgment in selecting the single string of casing?
I wasn't involved in any of that decision making.
Well, but I want to know your view of it. Now that you know about it, now that you know what your company did pursuant to your laser request that they be attuned to safety, do you think that that was a mistake?
The original well design was to run a long string. It was approved by the MMS. There was then a discussion in the course of the drilling of the well whether a long string or a 7-inch liner would be most appropriate. That is what I understand based on having looked at the documents and listened to our investigation team. The decision to run a long string, at least in part, was to do with the long-term integrity of the well.
Well, let me be fair to you, because I'm asking you to look with hindsight as to what happened and the decision that was made. But your own engineers warned in advance that this was a risky approach, and I'd like to put on the screen what's called a plan review that your engineers prepared in mid-April, warning against the long string of casing. As you can see, your engineers said that if you used a long string of casing, quote, it is unlikely to be a successful cement job. You would be unable to fulfill MMS regulations, and there would be an open annulus to the wellhead. And I have that on the screen. Now, those are serious risks. A failed cement job, a violation of MMS safety regulations, an open pathway for gas to travel to the top of the well. The same document says that if you use the liner and tieback approach, which is what ExxonMobil and other companies said you should have used, you would have avoided or lessened these risks. And here's what the plan review said. If you used a liner, there would be less issue with landing it shallow. It would be a second barrier to gas in the annulus and a higher chance for a successful cement job. Now, you said that BP was supposed to be focused like a laser on safety, yet BP apparently overruled the warnings of its own engineers and chose the more dangerous option. How can you explain that decision by BP? Why were the safety recommendations of your own engineers ignored?
I wasn't involved in any of the decision making. It's clear that there was some discussion amongst the engineering team and an engineering judgment was taken.
Now, it's clear to me that you don't want to answer our questions. Because isn't it true that you've served your life in BP? You've only recently become the CEO, but haven't you been in this business most of your professional life?
I've been in this business 28 years.
28 years. So you should have some knowledge about these issues. And I sent you a letter in advance asking you were going to be asked these questions and to be prepared to answer it. How can you explain this decision where you ignore, not you yourself, but people that work for you who should have known that it was your directive to be a laser on safety. How could they have ignored these warnings from people right within your company?
There was clearly a discussion between the engineering team as to what was the most appropriate course of action to take. An engineering judgment was taken that involved long-term integrity.
Well, it was more than an engineering judgment, because on April 15th, there's a document, which is 5 days before the blowout, that said that using the safer liner will add an additional $7 to $10 million to the completion cost. The same document calls it the single string of casing, the best economic case for BP. And the conclusion I draw from these documents is that BP used a more dangerous well design to save $7 million. What do you think about that? What's your response?
I believe that document also highlights that the long-term integrity of the well will be best served by a long string. The long string is not an unusual well design in the Gulf of Mexico. As I understand
Say that again.
the long string is not an unusual design in the Gulf of Mexico. As
Well,
I understand
it
there
from
are
Halliburton's witness, who was interviewed by our staff, that only 2 to 10% of those wells might use this particular string. The fellow from ExxonMobil and other CEOs said they wouldn't proceed this way. It appears to me that BP knowingly risked well failure to save a few $1 million, and you were drilling 18,000 feet below the sea. If you made mistakes, the consequences of those would be catastrophic, and in fact have turned out to be catastrophic. Don't you feel any sense of responsibility for these decisions?
I feel a great sense of responsibility for the accident. We need to allow...
How about for the decisions that made the accident more likely?
We need to determine what were the critical decisions, and...
Did you get my letter, and did you review it?
I've read your letter, Chairman,
and
I've
you
reviewed
realize in the letter we asked you to be prepared to discuss these issues?
As I've said, I've seen the documents following your letter, and I can't pass judgment on those decisions.
Even though you've worked 28 years in the oil industry, you're the BP CEO, and you said laser, like a laser, you're going to, safety is the biggest issue, and you have people under you making these kinds of decisions, and now you're reviewing them. Do you disagree with the conclusion that this was riskier to use this particular well lining?
I'm not prepared to draw conclusions about this accident until such time as the investigation has concluded.
Well, this is an investigation. That's what this committee is doing. It's an investigatory committee. And we expect you to cooperate with us. Are you failing to cooperate with other investigators as well? Because they're going to have a hard time reaching conclusions if you stonewall them, which is what we seem to be getting today.
I'm not stonewalling. I simply was not involved in the decision-making process. I've looked at the documents, and until the investigations are complete, both yours and others...
No, but that's somebody else's conclusion. What's your conclusion?
I haven't drawn a conclusion, Mr. Chairman.
I see. My time has expired, and I'm just amazed at this testimony. Mr. Hayward, you're not taking responsibility. You're kicking the can down the road and acting as if you have nothing to do with this company and nothing to do with the decisions. I find that irresponsible.
Along those lines, do you disagree with the conclusions of Chairman Waxman's June 14th letter, the one, Mr. Chairman, I sent you? Do you disagree with those 5 conclusions, 5 areas we hit, the conclusions we reached? Do you disagree with it?
I think they're very legitimate areas for concern, Mr. Chairman.
They're very what?
Legitimate areas for concern.
So we reached legitimate conclusions that people could then base the decision, you cut corners to save money, and we had this accident. Correct?
It doesn't appear that you're very concerned about them. Are you?
I'm very concerned that we get to the bottom of this incident and understand exactly what happened, such that we can ensure that it never happens again.
Easy to say.
Mr. Chairman, Just a request, please. If Mr. Hayward could move the microphone a bit
Yes.
closer, I'm having difficulty hearing.
Right. I think we all are. And I should have said something earlier. Just pull it a little closer if you could, please. Mr. Sullivan for questions, please. I should note Mr. Upton's here from Michigan, member of the full committee, and so is Mr. Engel. If they want to ask questions, they can at the appropriate time. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, according to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, there is mounting evidence that BP has one of the worst safety records of any major oil company operating in the United States. Is there a deficient safety culture at BP that led to the Deepwater Horizon and other disasters like the refinery explosion in Texas City, Texas, and the Alaskan oil pipeline spill?
I think we acknowledged in 2005 and 2006 that we had serious issues, and as a consequence set out to implement systematic change in the culture and safety of BP. I set the tone from the top by saying very clearly, safe, reliable operations were our number one priority. We've invested billions of dollars in the integrity of our plant. We've recruited many thousands of engineers and technologists into our company, including many from other industries, such as the nuclear industry and other parts of the chemical and oil and gas industry. And we have changed fundamentally our whole approach to the management of our operations through the implementation of significant changes to our processes.
Well, it doesn't seem like that. I mean, if you look at the reports of what happened on the Deep Horizon, it doesn't look like many safety procedures have changed much at all. And Mr. Hayward, do you feel that your safety record compared to other major oil companies is comparable?
As I said, it's clear that we had some serious issues to deal with in the 2005-2006 timeframe. And we have worked hard to improve our safety performance since that time period.
But it doesn't seem to be changing, Mr. Hayward. Your safety performance doesn't. And here's some highlights of your safety procedures. BP had 760 safety violations, and you've paid millions of dollars, $373 million in fines to avoid criminal prosecution and manipulating the propane markets. Also, if you look at other industries, sir, let's take some of your competitors, for example. Sunoco, you had 760 violations in 5 years. Sunoco had 8 safety violations. ConocoPhillips had 8 safety violations. In the same time, you had 760. Citgo had 2 safety violations. The same time, you had 760. And ExxonMobil had 1 safety violation. In the same time period, you had 760. How in the heck do you explain that?
As I said, we acknowledged the problems that we had in 2005 and 2006. The vast number of those things that you referred to date from that time period. And we have made major changes in the company over the last 3 to 4 years.
Do you think the changes you made in that time period you're talking about when you were CEO, I understand why you're saying that, do you think that they were using those measures and protocols on the Deep Horizon?
To my best knowledge, they absolutely were.
You don't think they shortcutted anything on the Deep Horizon? And you're as a CEO of a major company.
I believe
looking back, sir, do you think that they cut corners?
I believe we should await the results of the investigations before we draw conclusions.
But, sir, you've had to have looked at some of the results of any kind of your internal investigation. Internally, your investigation, did it show any kind of breakdown?
It's shown
anything
us
that you wouldn't have liked, that you, with your protocols you said you put in place, were any of those shortcutted?
The investigation is still ongoing, as you know. It's identified 7 areas: the cement, the casing, the integrity pressure, well control procedures, and 3 failures of the blowout preventer. And when the investigation is concluded, we'll make the judgment.
Well, I'd say that this problem is with your organization and your safety and the culture of your company's safety culture, and not a culture of our domestic oil and gas producers. As we can see, they haven't had the kind of problems you've had with cutting corners on safety. They have a lot of redundancies, contingency plans. I venture to say that this may not have happened if one of these other companies was operating that rig. Would you say that would be true?
I don't think I can make that judgment.
Do you think the other companies have different or stricter guidelines with their safety and spend more money on it? And you probably compare yourself to other companies, I'm sure.
I can't make a detailed comparison, but I can be clear that what we've done, we've invested billions of dollars, we've recruited thousands of people, and we've changed significantly our processes, systems, and procedures in the course of the last 3 years.
Well, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Before Mr. Dingle begins questions, we have votes on the floor again. There's less than 10 minutes remaining, so I'm going to at least get through Mr. Dingle's questions, and then we'll recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dingle.
Mr. Hayward, you had two choices, using single casing or tieback. The risks are substantial associated with single casing, which is what BP chose. Please answer yes or no. Can you assure us that under oath that was not a decision made to save time and money?
I wasn't part of that decision-making process.
I'm sorry?
I was not part of that decision-making process. So I can't possibly know the basis on which that decision was taken.
How much money was saved by using the single string casing?
I believe the documents refer to a sum of, I think, $7 to $10 million, and they also refer to the fact that the casing would have longer-term integrity as a long string.
Please submit that for the record. How much time was saved?
I don't recall the time that was saved. There would have been some time saved.
Would you submit that for the record, please? Now, you had the option of using a number of centralizers to keep the casing in the center of the borehole. Halliburton recommended 21. You ultimately chose to use 2. Can you tell us under oath that the decision to use 6 centralizers instead of the recommended 21 was not made to save time and money? Yes.
I was not involved in that decision, so it's impossible for me to answer that question.
All right. Can you tell us how much money BP saved by not using the proper number of centralizers?
I'm afraid I can't recall that.
Would you submit that for the record? How much time was saved?
And I don't recall that either, I'm afraid.
Please submit that for the record. You at BP decided not to conduct a cement bond log, an acoustic test to find out whether the cement was bonded to the casing and surrounded formations, despite Mineral Management Service regulations. Can you state under oath that, to the committee that BP did not decide against using the cement bond log to save time and money? Yes or no?
My understanding, from what I've read, again, I was not involved in decision-making, is that the team on the rig, the Transocean team, the BP team, and the Halliburton team concluded that they had sufficient evidence that the cement job was good, and therefore decided not to use the cement bond log.
Does that mean yes or no?
It means I can't answer your question in that form.
How much would this test have cost BP?
I can't recall that number, I'm afraid.
Please submit for the record. How long would the test have taken?
Of the order of hours, I believe, but I'm not certain.
Please submit that for the record. Would BP, now, you were supposed to engage in circulating drilling mud in the well bottom when the case is on the bottom and before cementing. This is referred to as bottoms up. Did BP fully circulate the mud? Yes or no?
I don't believe the mud was fully circulated. The process that the team on the rig were following was in line and approved by the MMS.
Thank you. Did BP, can you assure us under oath again that the decision not to fully circulate the mud was not made to save money and time?
I can't answer that question because I wasn't there.
Thank you. How much money did avoiding this procedure save?
I'm afraid I can't recall.
Would you submit for the record, please? How long would the fully circulating of the mud have taken?
I'm afraid I can't recall that either.
Would you submit that for the record, please? Now, BP made the decision not to install a casing hanger lockdown sleeve. Can you assure the committee under oath that the decision not to install such lockdown sleeve was not made to save time and money?
That was a decision I was not party to.
How much did the installing of the lockdown sleeve save BP?
I don't know.
How much time did installing the lockdown sleeve save?
I'm afraid I don't know that either.
Now, you have received a letter from the chairman of the subcommittee and the full committee asking a series of questions. When will the committee have the response to that letter?
You'll get it as soon as we can make them available to you.
Now, did BP have an emergency response plan in the event of a failure?
An emergency response plan or a spill response plan?
Sorry?
Congressman. Sorry, what was the question, please?
Did you have a response plan in the event of a failure at the well?
We had a response plan which we have...
What was the date of that response plan?
The response plan was last approved, as I recall, in June of 2009.
Please submit to us the date of the response plan and the number of times which it was updated and who it was that did the formulation of the plan. Please inform us for the record whether or not that plan was approved by the Mineral Management Service and on what date. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll look forward to seeing those answers in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Let members know we're going to stand in recess for 1 hour. We have 6 votes plus a motion to recommit.
Mr. Chairman?
The good news is when we come back, these are the last votes of the day. We'll be able to finish the hearing then.
Mr. Chairman, let me just
Burgess.
ask, Mr. Hayward has brought up a point about he followed the procedures of MMS. Once again, it is so critical that we get the federal regulatory agencies in this committee to ask them questions.
Mr. Burgess, as you know,
The fact that we haven't here after all these hearings is really disturbing to me.
Reclaim my time, Mr. Burgess. As you know, we have a methodical method we've been using in this investigation. We've gone through it very methodically. You know we have at least 2 more hearings. One was scheduled for Tuesday, but your request and my request, we moved it back a little more. There will be at least 2 more hearings. We will do our job. We'll have all parties here before this committee at the appropriate time.
Because clearly Mr. Hayward is not prepared to answer the questions, and we need to get MMS in here to do that as well.
MMS isn't going to help Mr. Hayward answer the questions. Mr. Hayward has to answer the questions himself.
Well, I would just submit that with the depth of knowledge...
We're in recess until 2 o'clock.
Any one of us could do his job.